Thank you for attending this morning. I know it's been a long conference and a lot going on, but there's been some great discussions, I think, going on. So I just want to explain the title a little bit. Oh, someone's dashing towards me. Keep going. Don't worry about that. So yeah, The Shock of the New was a title that came into my mind while having discussions with customers about the latest technologies and things like Industry 4. Industry 4 has been around as a phrase for a decade, probably, or getting close to a decade now. And it's a long time we spent about talking about it conceptually. And I think in reality now, with the new technologies that are coming on board and the innovations that are happening, actually the technology, and through this talk, the technologies are already maturing to a level of the adoption. So I've slightly taken a step into the unknown here, because my background is really in the manufacturing space. I should be in the other room, really, because that's my home territory. But what we found over the last 2 years is more and more connection between manufacturing and the supply chain. And a lot of people who've been working in manufacturing have also migrated in that direction as well. So I thought I'd take a bit of a gamble and move rooms and try and explain why through that. And the concept of those digital threads that I talked about, which were defined by Industry 4 originally as trying to cut through some of the barriers between it. So why Shock of the New? Well, Shock of the New was a series on the BBC about how modern art had affected our culture, our world, and the impact of modern art since the turn of the last century. And it was how these shocking new images had revolutionized people's thinking, the culture of the change. And this series went through seminal artists of the time to say what kind of impact that they had. And I draw the parallels between how technology has had a huge impact on our culture and how that technology may not have perforated through to manufacturing and the supply chain yet, but will have an impact. And that's why I've kind of said about the utopian dreams of digital threads. We may not get there today, but there's a way to get there. So through this series called Shock of the New, it's called Art of the Century and Change. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is change. It was done by Robert Hughes in 2008. At the same time, the Berlin Wall was coming down. So I don't think we really refer to that when we're in Berlin, and maybe, I find it quite interesting of that kind of cultural impact that these changes have had, and I said about that. So one of the artists that first that was on this series was Picasso, and Picasso he had a famous phrase, or to paraphrase it, is that he took a lifetime to learn how to draw as a child, like a child. And it's a bit like that with technology and experience and knowledge. Sometimes we have to have a lifetime's experience to actually work out how to make the best of things and maybe simplify things. So Picasso's message was very much, can we simplify the complexities of our culture and the world? The next person that really came up in the series was Deschamps. And you're probably going, why is he whittering on about artists and things like that? But hopefully I'll give you a connection. I wondered this morning whilst I was waking up, how am I going to get a connection between artists and scale? But Deschamps is that link. He took that concept of, he took a urinal that you could just go into any shop and buy a urinal. He signed the urinal, hung it on a gallery wall and said, that's art. Well, there were thousands, hundreds of thousands of these urinals created. But he decided that scale can also be specialized and made into art. The irony of that was it got smashed and they had to reproduce it in a really custom way. So something that was mass produced then retrospectively had to be made in a custom way to look like mass production. And then the final one, really, which had an impact, was Andy Warhol, which famously reproduced all of his art in mass production. So the answer to why I've gone on about this will come clear when I start to talk about the impact of scale with technology. Because the same thing that the artists have done and how that's impacted our lives will have the same impact with technology and those digital threads. So long wittering, a long introduction to this, but this is because this is the #1 question we get asked by our customers. How do I roll out manufacturing IT systems across N number of sites in N number of years? The big N is because that N was always increasing. So we get 10 sites, 20 sites, 30 sites, 100 sites globally. The little n is because that's always decreasing. Can we do that in 5 years? Can we do that in 2 years? Can we do that in 1 year? So the challenge is always working against us. And the main difference to me between Industry 3 and Industry 4 is Industry 3 technologies were unscalable. So I saw this little cartoon, which I quite enjoyed, which was, from our perspective, once again, from a manufacturing point of view, who we are, manufacturers, we're great, we're superb. What do we want? We want productivity. How do we get it? I don't know. What's the secret? How do we get it? And when do we want it? We want it now. Back to the little n, we want it now. So this model's really talking about those industry, the vertical and horizontal threads. I don't know if anyone's seen this model before, but it's been around for quite a while, and it was a part of, I don't know if anyone spoke about MISA, the organization that works with some of the standards in the manufacturing domain. They have a global education program, which is run by a company called MOMI. But a part of that global education program, this is kind of a slide out of it, is from the ARC consultancy group, which I'm using this as an example of both the good and bad of where we're at the moment. So we've got this sphere, which is supposed to encompass the whole of manufacturing in general. So everything from design through to support as one digital thread, from suppliers to customers as another digital thread, and being in the supply chain, I think those are the kind of worlds that you live in. And then we have the vertical one, which is the business to automation. And what I like about this slide, we've got on the bottom kind of systems, you could say, and where they are positioned in this globe. And in an Industry 3 world, what we end up with is lots and lots of point solutions. We end up with lots and lots of applications. And this is because of the structures we have within businesses and how they have developed over time, how companies have merged and things like this. So we'll have the maintenance domain, which will buy their own maintenance systems, and they'll have their own maintenance processes. There'll be the operations teams that have their own operations systems. So culturally, we have created structures that enforce those silos, reinforce those silos time and time and time again. What this diagram is saying is we've got to try and cut through those silos. So how do we create a system that can work together and cut through them when we have created silos and systems and IT that have reinforced them? And to me, once again, that is the big change between Industry 3 and Industry 4, because what many people have bought is applications in their domains to achieve what they want to achieve. The problem with that is once you scale, back to the Deschamps or the Andy Warhol example, if you've got a pattern that is already custom made, we're already artists, because what we have generated within our own facilities and in our own factories, within our own silos, is individual custom made suits. And then we try and go, right, go and scale that custom made suit. It just doesn't scale. We're starting from the wrong point. We've created this thing, so somehow we've got to move away from what we've created into a world that can be more like the sphere. Maybe those spheres can join together in a unified way. And that, to me, is where we start to talk about the power of hyperscaling technologies. Technology can assist it now with the types of technology that we're talking about, but how do we migrate from where we're today to tomorrow will take some time and will take some planning in the minds. And the two things that are required from my point of view will be back to the human nature of it. We need strong leaderships who understand the complex problems that we have created within our organizations and have a clear approach to how we can move towards something in 5 years' time, which requires a change of mentality. It requires us to go, if we're going to fund a whole load of projects, to have a whole load of business improvement activities, we need to think of it in a more strategic way. We are already spending that money to try and improve our business. But what we're trying to do is improve our business while sailing a boat, throwing an anchor out the back and stopping us moving forward because we have a custom-made suit that we're trying to drag along with us. So we have to create a way of migrating from that situation by moving towards more of a platform approach, moving away from the industry 3 architectures and pointing us in the right direction for the future. That does require some medium-term thinking as well as understanding the problem at hand. So just going to drill down into those individual digital threads now. So this is more, I'd say, our safety area here, or my safety area, because I know a little bit about this, but I've been talking to a few customers during this conference, and I've mentioned about APQC and APQP as industry standards. These industry standards define the processes and tasks required to take a platform approach to a business. Those standards are already out there and defined. It just happens that the technology and the structures within business don't always align to them very well. So when we have been working with customers who have had great big new conceptual designs, I haven't really talked about us as a business, ATS Global, mainly because it takes a bit of explaining. We're not a logo the world knows, but we have, we are a major supplier to the manufacturing industry globally. We support some of the biggest companies in the aerospace, defense and automotive customers, and we do this deployment for the last 35 years. So we have a real grounding in this kind of industry, and we have helped many businesses take this complete journey. So when we're talking about this journey, well, actually launch is here. So you could say traditionally the center of that sphere is the launch part, which is where manufacturing occurs. But to do manufacturing, there's a whole load of planning that needs to be defined up ahead of it. And the APQC standard or approach defines what all those steps were required. So if you've got a new product, it could be, I don't know, a new submarine or a new, whatever it is, that new concept that you're looking to design. And there's lots of that happening at the moment with electrification. So things like electric flight or new, so Rolls-Royce has just announced that they've got the contract for the new small modular reactor. They're very much at this conceptual phase here. They've done their conceptual design, they've done their thinking, they've kind of got the ideas there, they've got some requirements, they've been negotiating with the customer, they've done their planning phase. And as I said, for their point of view, Rolls-Royce got their program approval announced yesterday, which was sort of 450 million for the small modular reactor program. So they've gone through this planning phase. The next phase here is really complicated from a point of view, because this is where, when we start to talk about digital threads, we also talk about digital twins, which is another phrase that's been quite loosely thrown out without a true understanding from my point of view of what a digital twin is and how Industry 4 can achieve those things. So we've got the product design world. Well, product design world, depending on what industry you're in, could be in your PLM system, if you're into discrete manufacturing, or maybe in formulation systems if you're more into the batch processing world. But this process, you know, over the years has refined and grown. And if it's in the discrete world, you go from your EBOM, you're defining your EBOM and your designs, and you're conceptually drilling out that kind of information. But what often happens is these two silos are there. You have the engineering department and you have the manufacturing engineering department. These two things clash with each other, you know, and that's that silo build up, because the product design people will define all of their EBOMs, then hand it over to the process design people, and they're kind of going, hold on, how do I keep that iterative feedback that's requiring? And once again, this is because of that kind of cultural differences we have with it. But really, they should be heading towards unifying and having a prototype approach. So we've worked with businesses, like I said, where we've taken that approach, where we've worked with the product design and we simulate the processes in a virtual digital twin environment. So we can work together to get to a prototype, and that prototype lives in a simulation, in a digital twin world. Once we have that simulation, where do we go? Well, we're going to have to prove out some of those other technologies. So there might be things like additive manufacturing. There might be that disrupt the supply chain, because now when with additive manufacturing, you don't need all the parts that you used to need for conventional. You're actually just going to print those parts, maybe using titanium and these types of things. So all of this impacts and flows back through the planning stage to how that will have an impact on the supply chain. But there may be some specialist processes to de-risk as a part of that. And where we've worked with customers in the past is then working with things like technology centers. So this is a part of that journey, really. It's going, I've got a new product, I've got the conceptual design. How do I de-risk this design? Would be, right, I can work with things like the Fraunhofer Institutes in Germany or the Catapult Centres in the UK in collaborative memberships through things like Horizon Europe programs and things like that, which fund these types of things to de-risk these elements. So when I get to the pilot phase, I'm shortening my time to market, I'm de-risking the manufacturing processes, I'm collecting all that information into the kind of digital thread world. And then when I get to production, I'm pretty confident that we can achieve that, really. So APQC as a standard does highlight where the barriers are within businesses, the applications that sometimes create the conflicts between those. But also, if we started to take a platform approach based on my concept, get the platform right, get the original blueprint right, and then be able to scale that out, that means that we can eliminate those things and really focus on the value added bits, which are around the feedback and the corrective actions to continuously improve and continuously capture the knowledge about it. Where APQC, to me, stops and where it is interesting is the future business models. So as we release new manufacturing products, smart products, and have servitization models, then APQC kind of fails us a little bit, because really what we're interested in then is how do we maintain that product? How do we get the feedback of that information? And if I kind of switch back to the other one, into the support arm of that, we're a little bit lacking, really, you know, and as supply chain manufacturing group, I think we have to be responsible for the whole of that digital thread, everything from the conceptual design to the in-service business models. So back to Rolls-Royce, they have power by the hour. They don't sell engines anymore. They sell flight hours. Which we're talking with Ford, who are looking at the future of electrification and around how people won't buy cars anymore. They'll rent cars from the street, and we see more and more of that. Maybe you want a small car because you want an electric car because you just want to go to the local vicinity. You might want to hire a van because you've got to move. You no longer will we starting to own these assets. It's starting. So yeah, there's some work to be done with some of the standards around how, if everything turns to everything as a service, regardless, we come back to that sphere, we need that digital thread or the digital twin concept to be able to make that happen. I won't touch on this area too much because I feel I'll be talking in an area I'm not an expert in, or whatever expert means in that context. But this is the world of, you know, the push-pull. I'm sure everybody's heard of that kind of, where do you find the push-pull balance point of view? And I think the only thing I'll say on this is, obviously there's a third dimension in this world at the moment where we actually push-pulls based on infinite resources. We know we're getting some problems with the supply chain of resources. So there's a kind of third dimension to a push-pull, which is based on non-infinite resourcing approach. But most businesses who don't have that kind of concept of digital thread really, you know, push things into it because the manufacturing center, you know, that kind of simulation digital twin world hasn't been defined. So a lot of things get pushed, and, you know, the warehousing, the stacking, and that can cause some turbulence, and there's a lot of turbulence that happens in manufacturing because we don't understand where the push-pull is, and we don't understand that in an elegant way, and the design and manufacturing and planning don't always work together in those types of things as defined by the things like the APQC standard. So like I said, you as businesses know this stuff far more than me, but I'm always interested to understand where businesses feel they are at that push-pull point. Have they got enough definition or understanding of their manufacturing process, and how is that pulling from their process? So I've talked about things like digital threads, digital twin, open architectures, and I've talked about how over time we have created those silos, which make it very difficult to move from today's world. And I'm sure some ERP companies would argue with this slide a little bit, but this is my kind of point. If anyone's seen, like I said, Mesa and the level 4 to level 0 kind of a definition, actually industry 3 to me, and my knowledge and experience in it, is that we don't have scalable technologies at this level. We've built up applications that live, and when I talk about scalable technology, we're going to say applications installed on computers. We can scale the computer up to have more memory, more computing power, and big servers and all this type of thing. But the application itself can't scale outside of that computer. So there's a defined limit to what that application can run. So when we're talking about hyperscale or cloud, which is another name, if you like, for hyperscale, we're talking about an application that can scale outside of the boundaries of that physical computer, and therefore can scale to a data center, can scale to outside of a data center. So industry 3 really had some limitations on the technology. And as I said, my favorite phrase, which I think was, once again, I'm going to paraphrase it because I might get it wrong, Angela Merkel, when she launched Industry 4, she said, it's the Industry 4 is the adoption of internet technology into the manufacturing domain. Well, let's think about that. How much internet technology do we use in the manufacturing domain? Web browser, maybe, if we're lucky. Well, if you look at the challenges that these social media companies might come up with, where's our Facebook for manufacturing? Where's our link? You know, that we don't have these systems. So what's happened is the internet companies, okay, whether we like their world domination and the impact they've had on society, they have created a whole load of technology. So the internet was given to the world for free. Tim Berners-Lee Wood come up with a kind of concept working at CERN, didn't patent it, and it got given to the world for free. So we can use the internet like we have free roads. You know, they're not toll roads. We get given that. What's happened is the social media companies have created, great, thanks, you're giving us free roads. We'll create a whole load of technology on those free roads so we can promote our businesses. They don't pay for the internet. The internet's free. What they've done in turn is create a whole load of technology. So they've created whole loads of standards, GraphQL standards, and all the, you know, all kinds of front end technologies, all kinds of database technologies. So LinkedIn runs underneath it a petabyte database technology called Druid. There's Kafka Streams. There's a whole load of technology that the internet providers and the social media providers have given us for free. We barely use any of those in their manufacturing, because conceptually we haven't quite got our heads around how do we scale these digital threads, and how do we move from today's world that we've created into this new future where we have scalable technology. We're reducing our IT landscape, which could be thousands of different applications in the landscape in one facility, and we've replicated that across our whole enterprise. How do we get to a position where we're reducing our IT landscape and moving to the future? Well, it's going to take time. As I said, it's a kind of a utopian dream as it is today, but those technologies are available today. They're a part of Industry 4. It requires, like I said, strong leadership, and I'll show you some of those concepts behind it. But there's still some issues to tackle in this world. I mean, we're doing a project currently in the 5G networking space with Ford on their electrification line, trying to see how can 5G help with the scaling issue that we have, connecting devices, connecting equipment to the shop floor. Still an issue for businesses. Machine providers really haven't quite aligned to the world of IoT or industrial IoT, so there's still some issues in that space. Controllers who control the physical equipment, kind of getting there with some of the soft technology, but really a PLC, a programmable logic controller that run all the machines in all of the manufacturing sites across the world, haven't changed conceptually in 40 years. So, you know, things have to progress. You know, if we want to progress, we've got to start knocking down these kind of hurdles and barriers around it. So 5G networking is interesting because of its low latency, high bandwidth, and all of these types of things. So interesting, but not quite mature enough. You know, so I'm sure 5G vendors would argue that it is mature, but still, I think it still needs some work in the manufacturing domain. Where things are already, like I said, all these technologies in the hyperscale domain, they're there, they're proven, they work. How do then manufacturers and supply chain companies start looking at how they can adopt these types of technologies and approaches? So this is why I call it the shock of the new. It's the equivalent of modern art disrupting the traditional artists that we've had, predominantly built around kind of religious art in the Western world. How do we shake it up? How do we change something that seems so deep rooted in our organization? And it's the legacy of the mind. You know, we have to change people's minds. We have to help businesses make that transition. How do we take that first step? So just a little bit about, I didn't want to go too much about us, but ATS, I said, globally, over 1,000 engineers. We have many partners that we work with, including now things like AWS, Azure, and things like that. So this is a complicated problem. We want to take 30 years of knowledge like Picasso, and we want to try and simplify the problem. Can we do it? Okay, it's a challenge, but we've got a lot of knowledge that makes us be able to paint like a child. So how do we get it? Back to the question of beginning of there. We want it. How do we get it? Well, you have to be ready for the shock of the new. Our business is ready to take that kind of, we were talking to a pharmaceutical company, life science companies post-COVID have really looked at how do I digitize myself? And the head of supply chain for this company said to me, how do I get it? I understand your vision, your pictures. What are the downsides? And I said, well, it's literally the downsides to it is that I don't think organizations can tear up their structures quick enough. I don't think they can. We have scalable technology now. It's going to take a different mindset. It's going to take a different approach. It's a brave new world, to quote another literary, it's a brave new world, and it is about adopting the shock of the new within businesses. And this is kind of my utopian view, really. So if we took that kind of concepts of Facebook and these types of things, can we create a multi-tenant cloud today? Yes, we can. Can we share and scale those intellectual property defined within processes across cloud infrastructures, not just cloud infrastructure? You can do the same in private with Kubernetes and stuff like that. But hyperscale technology, yes, they're available. They can be done. You can take your intellectual property, you can scale it infinitely. You can have one user using a system or 1 million users using the system. The system will cope because it's built to cope, because the internet's built to cope. That can be then issued in a multi-tenant, safe way, sharing data in your supply chain as a part of processes within your manufacturing and into the wild. This is what they do for us every day. You can control through a multi-tenancy how data's moved from one domain to another. So like in the aerospace industry, there's some issues around export control data and things like this, but all of that can be managed within the cloud. You can have online chatbots that can support your users directly. You can have 24/7 support within those systems. All of that hyperscale technology and knowledge base to train your users through these platforms is all available. within it. And you can focus on the individual users within that. So you've got to put the user first, technology second, or third or fourth within it. So really shifting perspective about what that individual requires. I just realized I've really run over time, so I'm going to quickly. Another thing with these types of technology, and it's called DevOps or GitOps or ML Ops for machine learning ops, is about making sure your technology is as fresh and up to date as possible. So you're no longer trying to sail your boat with your anchor thrown out the back because you've got 60% of your business weighed down by architectural debt. You've got to be able to have a streamlined process that has complete control over how you deploy your architecture, infrastructure as code, continuous integration, continuous delivery. So you're not having to sail with your anchor thrown out the back. How do you do that? It's up to you. Do you want to develop it yourselves? Yes, you can. You can develop, you can create your own IT teams, you can take today's technology and you can start developing cloud platforms with your apps. Or you can take low-code solutions like Mendix and things like this and OutSystems. There's loads of low-code applications. Traditional COTS products, all the way through to SaaS. It depends what you want as a business and what strategy you want to take. And it's to do with, do you want to own the risk? Do you want to trust the SaaS providers? So on this scale here, as a business, thinking in that long-term vision about how you want to approach it, you've got to make some conscious choices. And I've put 5 things down here. Is it you want to own the risk and therefore you want to raise the CapEx? Absolutely fine. Do you want to trust an organization or do you want to run it more in a OpEx service? Do you want the flexibility to create your own custom solution, or do you want to have a maintainability where you don't worry about what IT landscape you have, what database technology you're using? Do you want to have a large IT team, or do you want to have a small business-focused team? And the last one, you need more experts or more novice-based things. So these are conscious decisions people can make as a business. So just to summarize, as I said, slightly over time, so sorry, I rushed those last few things, but really scaling with scalable technology should be scalable business models, which should save money. Can only do that if we standardize the approach that we're having and stop making custom suits, stop making bespoke art, think like Andy Warhol. Great user experience. These technologies are out there. You can have interactions within the application itself. You can support the users. You can focus on the users and not worry about the technology if you take SaaS approach. And with Agile DevOps, you always get fresh technology, so you're not weighed down by legacy of IT. So they're my top 3 takeaways for you. So there's definitely another way. I'm not saying it's easy, but it requires change of the culture in the mind. And yeah, so thank you very much for tolerating a manufacturing person in the supply chain group, but hopefully it brings a different perspective as well. So yeah, thank you very much.